Vayhi Beshalach Paro es ha'om. The crucial moment of the Jewish people going me'avdus l'cheirus, from slavery into freedom, the beginning of the creation of Am Yisrael itself, starts off rather disappointingly. Vayhi Beshalach Paro es ha'om means Paro expelled them from Egypt. I personally would have preferred the words used by the Tehillim in Hallel. B'tzeis Yisrael b'Mitzrayim, Beis Yaakov me'amloes, Hoysa Yehuda l'kodsho, Yisrael b'am shaloisov. Those psukim have more of a powerful, motivated, directional ring to them. They knew what they were doing. They left Egypt, and Yehuda was Malchus, and they were going in the right direction. They knew where they were going and why they were going. But he b'shalach paro es ha'am sounds rather weak, as if they didn't want to leave, and they were really only being expelled from Egypt against their will. And indeed, in the Medrash, very often we find, and here as well, that the word vayehi is a lashon tsar. The vayehi expresses some negativity, as opposed to the word vahoya. Vahoya kisavo la'aretz expresses some future simcha, and vayehi expresses like vayehi b'mei achashverosh. Vayehi often has a nuance of tsar to it, of negativity to it. So what's going on here in the beginning of the parsha? So if you look in the Orach Chaim HaKadosh and in the Kli Yakar and in other Mefarshim, you'll find something very interesting, which shouldn't really be surprising, but it's just is surprising in terms of the way we learn Chumash, that actually there were different groups within Klal Yisrael, as there were then, as there always were, and as there are today. There are some people who don't really know why they're Jewish, or what it means to be Jewish, or where they're going, or what they're doing, but they are followers, they're swept along, they do what they're doing because everyone around them is doing it, and that's the way to do it. And then there are those people who are going with a sense of direction, a sense of purpose, and knowledge, and primarily with emunah. So what's happening here is something very fascinating in the Parsha. If you read the opening Pesukim of Beshalach, you find the Jewish people described 3 times as with the word ha'om. Vahi Beshalach Paro es ha'om. V'anochem Elokim derech eretz Pelishtim ki yamah, the people, pentirul mechama, right? That they wouldn't be able to see war and still retain their confidence. So there's an element of weakness in the There is within Klal Yisrael, and there always has been, Amcha, the people who are really not leaders but followers, not knowledgeable but just living on autopilot. And then there is V'chamushim olu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. That there is also, in contrast to the there is the b'nei Yisrael. The b'nei Yisrael are chamushim. Chamushim is a very powerful word. It means they are armed. So of course on a simple level it means, as Rashi says, mezuyanim, they are armed with equipment, with armaments, ready for battle. And indeed in the modern Israeli army, the Chayil Chimush, the Chimushim is the armaments. The Katzin Chimush is in charge of making sure there is ammunition and weaponry and that everything is in order in terms of the equipment that is being used by the army. So Chamushim means they were fully equipped to do battle. But Rashi brings down also a second perush, that Chamushim means actually only 1/5 got out, that 4/5 died in Mitzrayim. Whether we take the numbers literally or not is not important for the moment. What's important is that the Pasuk is saying only a fraction got out. The Rabbeinu Bachai has got a very interesting take on the word V'chamushim olu b'nei Yisrael. He says that the word Chamushim is written without a Vav. So actually it could read V'chamishim. What is Chamishim here? Why is Chamishim significant? He says, because they were told by Moshe and they knew that the real tachlis, the real purpose and objective of going out of Mitzrayim would only happen in 50 days' time at Har Sinai. They had to go through the whole 49 days with Sfiras HaOmer. V'chamishim olu b'nei Yisrael. They knew where they were going to. They knew what they were doing. They were on their way to Kabbalas HaTorah. They were motivated. They were knowledgeable. Right, as the Hamikdava here says, the word Chamushim means they had a certain certainty of knowledge and understanding. But that was Bnei Yisrael, not the Am. The Amcha needed to be thrown out of Egypt. And indeed, the Rechaim one place identifies the Am always with the Erev Rav. That's a bit of a longer story, exactly who were the Erev Rav. Did they or did they not integrate into the Jewish people? And why did they come along? They were fellow travelers. But I'll call upon him, we do find from the very beginning that there were different groups within Klal Yisrael. And the Gemara says that even at the Kriyas Yamsuf, Moshe Rabbeinu says to them, Yatzvu Ru'as Yeshuas Hashem, right? And he addresses different groups within Klal Yisrael. Some of them wanted to fight. Some of them wanted to go back to Egypt. To each one of them, he said, no, just look and watch and see the Yeshuas Hashem. So here we find something very fascinating about Parshat Beshalach in general. Big picture, Parshat Beshalach, interestingly, divides up symmetrically, one might even say surgically divided in half, between two very different stories. But really, to understand what is happening to the Jewish people and the creation of the Jewish people, you have to understand these two halves and how they fit together. Because if you look in the numbers of the psukim, there are 116 psukim in Beshalach, and it divides up into two groups of exactly 58 psukim. The first 58 psukim is the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu transported Klal Yisrael almost like on a magic carpet out of Mitzrayim and looked after them and protected them and Kriyas Yamsuf. They didn't have to do anything, just Yatzavu Ura'u Es Yeshuas Hashem, just to watch the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And at the very end, it says, Vayai Yisrael es hayod hagdola she'osa b'shem b'Mitzrayim. They saw the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as clearly as any human being can ever see it. Vayaminu b'Hashem Moshe. That was a peak moment of emunah. And then what happens in the next 58 psukim starts with the word Vayasa Moshe es ha'om. At that point starts a whole different reality for the Jewish people. They are now in a world of nisyonot. HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts them through test after test after test. He takes them to a place where there's no water. And then there is water, but it's bitter water. And then there's no food, and then there's mum. And then they have to collect it daily, and then they can't collect it on Shabbos. And then they wanted meat, and they get the slav, one after another. Then the ultimate nisayon is a molek. Along the way, in the second half of Beshalach, there is one test after another. And as in with all tests, some people passed it, some people failed it. But it was clearly a message to Klal Yisrael that is in fact Jewish life. And if there's one really important takeaway from this week's Parsha, it's this, that actually our lives really divide up into two halves. There are the gifts from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we receive, which are matnas Elokim, where we simply have to acknowledge the Yad Hashem, Vayai Yisrael as a Yad Hashem, to see the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu guiding us and providing us with all our intelligence and our assets and our abilities and our families and our society and all the gifts that we have today, up to and including being able to return to Eretz Yisrael, that the Jewish people are living in Eretz Yisrael today and are able to develop the land of Israel in the way it should be developed, and keeping Shemitah this year. I'm aware of it literally 24/7. The tremendous matnas Elokim, the gift of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is the first half of Beshalach, and that's the first half of our life. We start off our Shemana Esra only with Shevach and Hoda'ah, to praise for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then there's the second half of Beshalach, which is to be Omeid B'Nisayon, to see things happening which shouldn't be happening, and to know how to deal with them, to be tested again and again and again. Particularly, says the Kliyokah, with Midas HaHistapkus. Midas HaHistapkus means that Klal Yisrael were trained to have minimum water and minimum mon and minimum food, and to go through the midbar, because in order to live a life of Yirat Shamayim, one needs to train oneself to minimize one's physical engagement. Of course, we engage with the world, and of course we need physical pleasures and physical wealth, but that has to be minimized. Mistapek b'mu'at. One has to be able to be willing to live a life with a minimal amount of gashmius, because if one doesn't, then the whole spiritual achievements of one's personal life and of one's national life goes down the drain, is in some way affected negatively by one's involvement in the material world. So that is really, I heard once a very beautiful parish from one of the Gedolei Hasidus, when we start saying Mashiv Baruch Hamorid HaGoshem. So what does it mean, Mashiv Baruch Hamorid HaGoshem? It means we're at the beginning of the rainy season. We thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for being the source of the winds and the rains which bring water to the land. But he says, no, there's another parish to this at all. Mashiv HaRuach. Ruach means Ruchniyut. And we're asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahashiv et haruchniyut, to restore to us, as in Hoshiva Shevteinu K'Barishono. Hoshiv means to restore to us the Ruach of Klal Yisrael. the emunah of Klal Yisrael they saw at Kriyas Yamsuf should be restored to us. Umoirid Hagoshen, and the Gashmius of life should be lahorid, should be minimized, not excluded. We don't live an ascetic life. We don't live in a cave. We're not monks, but we should not over-engage and be over-involved in materialism. And that is the great challenge. The great challenge of Parshat Beshalach is Mashiv HaRuach Umorid HaGoshen, to restore the emunah that they saw at the Yam Suf, and to know how to be Morid HaGoshem, to live a life where one is able to be mistapik b'muat and minimize one's engagement with Gashmias. And this is really the big picture, a Perush on Parshas Beshalach. But Chamushim is very interesting in that sense that they came out and they knew, those who had knowledge, the Yisrael, not the Am. The Amcha came along, they were not leaders, they were followers. That's what we daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Nia l'roish v'lo l'zonov, to be leaders and not followers. And that has to be our aspiration for ourselves, for our children and grandchildren, to train them to be knowledgeable and certain and purposeful, and to know what it means to live a life of Torah and mitzvahs, to live a life of emunah as part of Am Yisrael. And that has to be done b'chamushim. We have to be equipped, we have to be armed, both physically, mentally, and spiritually, with the ideas and the protections in order to be able to achieve that purpose. Finally, the real armament of Klal Yisrael was an unusual one. Vayikach Moshe es atzmos Yosef imo. The next pasuk immediately after the word chamushim, it says, Moshe takes atzmos Yosef. Say Chazal, the bones of Yosef, the coffin of Yosef that was carried for 40 years in the Midbar, side by side with the Aron HaKodesh, that coffin was the key to Kriyas Yamsuf. And Chazal learn a very beautiful limud out of that we say in Hallel, Vayar Ha'om Vayonos, that the Yamsuf, when it saw Klal Yisrael Vayonos, Kriyas Yamsuf, the Yamsuf fled. Right? Vayonos means it fled. What does Vayonos mean? It appears one other place in the Torah. It says Vayonos Vayetze Hachutza, that Yosef, when he had the great test of immorality with Ashes Potiphar, who was trying her utmost to seduce him, and he was a young unmarried man, and he had the opportunity to commit immorality with the Ashes Potiphar. Vayonos vayetze hachutra. He was boireach. He fled from that situation in order not to be involved in an avera. That zechus, say Chazal, that's the Gemara which says Vayonos vayetze hachutra. That was in that zechus of Mesirus Nefesh. In that zechus we had Kriyas Yamsuf. We have the Nisim that saved Klal Yisrael. That brought about the emunah, and that was the greatest gift. But even after you get all the gifts in the world, you still need the second half of Beshalach, which is Lamod b'Nisayon, to be able to pass the tests of the Mon, of the Mayim, of Amalek, and to keep our focus on the purpose, the Chamushim, the 50 days leading to Kabbalas HaTorah and the creation of Mamlechas Kohanim v'Goy Kodesh v'Chei Nihirot.